misdiagnosis that changed everything. What happens when the diagnosis is wrong and it changes the course of your life? For many, a diagnosis brings clarity. It opens a door toward understanding, treatment, and hope. But for Robin Williams, it marked the beginning of an invisible battle, one that neither he nor those closest to him fully understood at the time. In 2014, the world lost Robin, not just a brilliant comedian and actor, but a man who brought joy and light into the lives of millions. When news broke of his passing, the public was stunned. How could someone so full of life, someone who made us laugh until we cried, be suffering so deeply in silence? At the time of his death, Robin had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a progressive nervous system disorder known for causing tremors, stiffness, and difficulties with movement. It was a heartbreaking revelation, but it wasn't the full story, not even close. Months later, after a closer examination of his brain, doctors discovered the truth. Robin had been living with a condition called Lewy Body Dementia, or LBD, a devastating and complex form of dementia that is often misunderstood even by medical professionals. LBD is insidious. It mimics other illnesses, disguises itself in ways that confuse even the most experienced physicians. And in Robin's case, it wore the mask of Parkinson's. That misdiagnosis, as his son Zach would later share, affected not only Robin's physical health, but chipped away at his spirit, his confidence, and his understanding of what was happening inside him. Robin knew something wasn't right. He felt it in his body, in his mind, in the way the world started to make less sense. But what he was told and what he actually experienced didn't quite match. He tried to make peace with the Parkinson's diagnosis, to accept it, to fight through it, as he had done with so many things in his life. But deep down, it didn't feel true. This is the tragedy of misdiagnosis. It's not just about the wrong medication or the mistreatment. It's about the confusion, the isolation, and the slow erosion of trust in oneself. For someone like Robin, who had spent a lifetime expressing emotions so freely, to suddenly feel like a stranger in his own mind, it must have been terrifying. And for those of us who grew up with Robin, who watched Dead Poets Society, Mrs. Doubtfire, or Good Will Hunting with a hand over our hearts, it's almost unthinkable to imagine that behind that radiant smile was a man quietly suffering. But this story isn't just about loss. It's about learning, about seeing the invisible wounds that diseases like LBD can cause, and about reminding ourselves that behind every diagnosis is a human being, one who deserves to be understood, not just treated. Let's continue this journey and look deeper into what Lewy Body Dementia really is and why understanding it can make all the difference. What is Lewy Body Dementia? If you've never heard of Lewy Body Dementia, you're not alone. In fact, many people, even those in the medical field, only begin to understand it when it touches someone they love. Lewy Body Dementia, or LBD, is the second most common form of progressive dementia after Alzheimer's disease. But unlike Alzheimer's, which mainly affects memory, Lewy Body Dementia weaves a much more tangled web, one that disrupts thinking, movement, behavior, and even perception. So, what exactly is it? Lewy Body Dementia is caused by abnormal protein deposits called Lewy bodies that build up in the brain's nerve cells. These deposits interfere with chemical signals and disrupt the brain's ability to function properly. And because these changes can show up in so many different ways, it often looks like several diseases rolled into one. A person with LBD may experience sudden shifts in alertness. One moment, they seem perfectly fine, and the next, they're confused or even unresponsive. Visual hallucinations, not imagined memories, but vivid images of things that aren't there. Tremors and muscle rigidity similar to Parkinson's. Sleep disturbances, acting out dreams, or waking up in fear. Severe changes in mood anxiety, or even paranoia. It's this unpredictable mix, cognitive, emotional, and physical, that makes Lewy body dementia so difficult to recognize. And it's why someone like Robin Williams, with all his brilliance and emotional intelligence, felt like he was slipping through cracks no one could see. For families, the experience can be bewildering. One day, your loved one might be fully present, recalling old stories with clarity. The next, they may not recognize you or speak in ways that feel disconnected from reality. The inconsistency isn't just painful, it's exhausting. You begin to question what's real, what's imagined, and how much of your loved one is still there. But here's what's important to know. Behind those symptoms is still a person, a whole feeling, human being who's likely aware on some level of what's happening to them. That's perhaps one of the most haunting truths about LBD patients. Often have moments of clarity when they understand just how much they're losing. In Robin's case, those moments may have been filled with fear, confusion, or even shame, not because he was weak, but because the disease was stealing his sense of self. There is no cure for LBD, but early recognition can help families plan better, offer the right kind of care, and make decisions with compassion rather than crisis. And more than anything, it allows us to respond with gentleness, not only toward the person who is sick, but toward ourselves as we walk alongside them. As we move forward, let's take a deeper look at how LBD is so often confused with Parkinson's and why that confusion can lead to devastating consequences. Parkinson's versus Lewy body dementia, the critical differences. At first glance, Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia, LBD, can look like two sides of the same coin. Both affect the nervous system. Both can bring tremors, stiffness, and difficulty with movement, and both tend to appear later in life. But beneath those surface similarities lie two very different realities, and the consequences of mistaking one for the other can be life-altering. Robin Williams was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He was told that what he was feeling, the changes in his body, the tremors, the stiffness, were all part of that disease. But what he didn't know, and what doctors didn't yet see, was that something much more complicated was unfolding inside his brain. So what's the difference? Parkinson's disease is primarily a movement disorder. It typically begins with tremors, slow movement, and rigidity. Over time, some patients may experience changes in mood or mild cognitive impairment, but those symptoms usually appear later in the disease's progression. Lewy body dementia, on the other hand, often starts with cognitive symptoms, confusion, memory issues, visual hallucinations. Physical symptoms like tremors and muscle stiffness may follow. In Lewy body dementia, the mental shifts can be startling and inconsistent. A person may seem clear and present in the morning, only to become completely disoriented by afternoon. Another key difference lies in how the brain is affected. In Parkinson's, Lewy bodies tend to gather in areas that control movement. In Lewy Body Dementia, they spread more widely, impacting thinking, behavior, mood, and motor function all at once. This makes treatment more complex and more delicate. And then there's how each disease responds to medication. Parkinson's medications, especially those that boost dopamine levels, can be helpful for motor symptoms. But in someone with Lewy body dementia, those same medications can cause extreme side effects, worsening confusion, triggering hallucinations, even inducing dangerous delusions. For Robin, those drugs became an added burden. As his son Zach later said, "Those drugs are no joke. They're hard on the mind and the body. Imagine trying to heal while the very thing meant to help you is making you feel worse. It's like being given the wrong map in a forest you're already lost in." That's why understanding the difference isn't just academic, it's urgent. For patients and their families, the right diagnosis means the difference between clarity and chaos. It means adjusting expectations, managing care thoughtfully, and most importantly, honoring the person behind the symptoms. In Robin's case, we now know that the symptoms didn't quite match up with what many Parkinson's patients experience. And in hindsight, the signs of Lewy body dementia were their subtle shifting but present. Coming up next, we'll take a closer look at how this misdiagnosis affected not just Robin's body, but his spirit, and how the treatment path built on a mistaken identity deepened his pain. The cost of the wrong diagnosis. A misdiagnosis isn't just a medical error, it's a detour down a path that can lead to deeper confusion, emotional exhaustion, and sometimes irreversible harm. For Robin Williams, that path began with Parkinson's, but the true cause of his suffering was Lewy body dementia, silently reshaping his mind while the world searched for the wrong answers. At the time of his diagnosis, Robin likely felt relief, finally a name for what he was going through. And yet that relief was short-lived. The symptoms he faced didn't quite fit the Parkinson's profile. He wasn't just dealing with tremors or stiffness. He was experiencing vivid hallucinations, mood swings, memory lapses, and what his son Zach later described as intense confusion and frustration. This mismatch became its own kind of torment. Robin, a man known for his sharp wit and emotional depth, sensed that the explanation didn't fully capture what was happening inside him. His inner world was unraveling, but the tools being used to help him weren't designed for the real battle he was fighting. Then came the medication. Parkinson's disease is often treated with drugs that increase dopamine levels in the brain, which can help control movement. But in someone with Lewy body dementia, these drugs can have devastating side effects. Zach recalled, "Those drugs are no joke. They're hard on the mind and the body." Instead of easing his symptoms, the treatment may have worsened them, deepening Robin's confusion, heightening his hallucinations, and exhausting his emotional reserves. Imagine waking up each day in a body you no longer recognize, surrounded by people trying their best but treating the wrong illness. Imagine the heartbreak of knowing that even your doctors don't fully understand what you're going through. For someone like Robin, whose genius was rooted in emotional awareness and expressive nuance, this was more than a health issue. It was a spiritual crisis. He wasn't just losing his abilities, he was losing his sense of identity. And then there's the ripple effect. His wife, his children, his close friends, all trying to care for a man whose condition was misinterpreted. The weight of that uncertainty pressed on them all. Zach would later speak openly about his frustration, his helplessness, and the deep pain of watching his father struggle with a diagnosis that never quite fit. This is the real cost of misdiagnosis. It's not just about prescribing the wrong pills. It's about eroding trust, distorting reality, and isolating those who are already vulnerable. It's a cost paid in confusion, in missed chances, and sometimes in lives. And yet, from this tragedy, there is something to be learned. In the next part of our story, we'll explore how Zach Williams, a son who lost his father to the unknown, found his own path toward healing and meaning. Zach Williams, a son, watching his father fade. For many of us, Robin Williams was a beloved voice of joy, a whirlwind of energy, humor, and heart. But for Zach Williams, he was something even more sacred, Dad. To watch a parent suffer is one of life's most heartbreaking experiences. But to watch them slowly become someone else, someone confused, withdrawn, and quietly unraveling, is a sorrow that words can barely hold. Zach has spoken about that time with remarkable grace, but behind his steady voice is a son who was quietly breaking. He recalls how difficult it was to understand what was happening. What he was going through didn't match what many Parkinson's patients experience, Zach said. There was a growing disconnect between the diagnosis, the treatments, and the man Robin used to be. Zach described feeling beyond empathy. He felt frustration, helplessness, and grief, all before his father had even passed away. It can be really isolating, he said, even when you're surrounded by family and loved ones. That isolation doesn't come from being alone. It comes from not knowing how to help, from standing beside someone you love and watching them slip away in ways you can't explain or stop. Robin was there physically, but in many ways, he was already fading. His brilliance dulled by confusion, his light dimmed by fear. His laughter, once effortless, became heavy with effort, and Zach could see it. He could see the toll it took, the way his father tried to mask his pain, the way he reached for clarity but kept coming up short. That's the cruelty of Lewy Body Dementia. It doesn't take someone all at once. It takes them in pieces, slowly, silently. As Robin's world narrowed, Zach's love grew louder. But love, as powerful as it is, can feel powerless in the face of a disease that steals presence, awareness, and joy. After Robin's passing, Zach carried not just the weight of grief, but the burden of what he wished he had understood sooner. It took time and courage for him to speak publicly about it, but when he did, his words became a beacon for others navigating the same shadowed path. Zach's journey is a reminder that grief isn't just about losing someone. It's about living with the absence of what could have been. It's about the unanswered questions, the what-ifs, and the ache of watching someone you love disappear long before they're gone. And yet, even in the heart of that sorrow, Zach chose to heal. He chose to honor his father, not just by remembering who he was, but by advocating for those facing the same misunderstood illness. In our next chapter, we'll step further into the emotional landscape of families affected by Lewy Body Dementia, where small moments become lifelines and compassion becomes the most powerful medicine of all, a journey no one was prepared for. Robin Williams was no stranger to hardship. Throughout his life, he spoke openly about addiction, depression, and the relentless expectations that came with fame. But nothing could have prepared him or his loved ones for the journey Lewy Body Dementia would force him to take. It began with subtle shifts, small lapses in memory, a moment of confusion during a conversation, flickers of something off. At first, they seemed explainable. We all forget things sometimes. We all have bad days. But for Robin, those moments became more frequent. The lines in a script that once came effortlessly took more effort. His natural rhythm, that brilliant rapid-fire cadence that had dazzled audiences for decades, began to slow. Then came the deeper changes. He began seeing things that weren't there, not terrifying images, but vivid, persistent hallucinations that made the world feel less certain. His sense of time and space started to blur. The man who once seemed to channel 1,000 characters in one breath now struggled to hold on to one clear thought. Robin wasn't just losing memory. He was losing himself piece by piece, day by day. This is what Lewy Body Dementia does. It doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It creeps in quietly, stealing clarity, voice, and presence. For someone like Robin, whose entire life had been built on presence, on showing up, connecting, performing, this loss was devastating. It wasn't just about being forgetful. It was about feeling like a stranger in his own body, about walking into a room and forgetting why he was there, about sensing that something was wrong but not being able to name it, and worse, about feeling like no one else could see what he was going through. For those around him, especially his wife and children, it was heartbreaking. How do you care for someone who can't explain their pain? How do you comfort a person whose reality keeps slipping? There were good days, moments when Robin would smile, crack a joke, or reflect with startling clarity. But those moments were fleeting. The laughter came less often. The silences grew longer. The fear, though rarely spoken, was always there. And yet Robin tried. He fought through confusion, stayed gentle through frustration, and continued to love his family even as the world became harder to understand. This was a journey no one was prepared for, not Robin, not his doctors, not his loved ones. But it was one marked by deep courage, quiet resilience, and a love that never left him, even in the fog. In the next part of our story, we'll hear from someone else who walked a similar path, a daughter who stood by her father through the storm of LBD and found meaning in the fragments he left behind. Denise's story, when your father becomes a stranger but still your dad. When Lewy Body Dementia enters a family, it doesn't just change the person diagnosed, it changes everyone who loves them. That truth is something Denise Spurgeon knows all too well. Denise's father was diagnosed with LBD in the final years of his life. It was a diagnosis that brought answers but not peace. As the disease progressed, her father became increasingly distant, not in body but in mind. The man who had once held her hand through childhood, who had offered advice and comfort with quiet strength, began to drift into another reality. And yet, even as his memory faded and his world blurred, Denise and her family made a choice. A beautiful, painful, deeply human choice. They let him be. They didn't correct him when he spoke to people who weren't there. They didn't scold or hush him when he described things that didn't make sense. They listened. They sat beside him, not always understanding, but always present. My dad was fortunate enough to know everything as it developed, Denise wrote. We kept nothing from him. His hallucinations became something he enjoyed sharing. That was all he had. We let him, and we listened. Those words, "we let him," and "we listened," carry a quiet kind of heroism. They remind us that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to someone losing their grip on reality is not correction, but companionship. Not fixing, just feeling. Not explaining, just existing together in whatever way they need. To Denise, her father became a stranger in many ways. He forgot names, faces, places. He confused the present with the past. But he was still her dad, still the man who had shaped her life, even as the disease reshaped his mind. There is something sacred in that kind of love, the kind that endures beyond memory, beyond logic. It's the love that stays when the person you knew is no longer fully there, and you choose to stay anyway. Denise lost her father less than a year before sharing her story. The pain was fresh, but so was the clarity. It's a terrible disease, she said. There needs to be more research. And she's right, not just for treatment, but for understanding, support, and above all, dignity. Stories like Denise's bring us back to what matters most, not the labels, the diagnoses, or even the symptoms, but the relationships we fight to preserve. The quiet moments of holding hands, of listening without judgment, of loving, even as everything else changes. In our next chapter, we'll turn the page to Zach once more, not as the grieving son, but as a man choosing healing, advocacy, and hope in the wake of unimaginable loss. Zach's healing after his father's death. Grief is not a straight road. It twists, it loops, it disappears, and then returns when you least expect it. For Zach Williams, losing his father was not just the loss of a parent, it was the loss of a guiding light, a constant presence, a voice that had always been there, even in silence. In the months after Robin's death, Zach struggled. Not just emotionally, but physically, mentally, and spiritually. I was just sick and tired of trying to treat myself using harmful means, he admitted in a later interview. The pain ran deeper than sadness. It was disorientation, guilt, confusion, and a longing to make sense of something that had none. For a time, Zach fell into what he called destructive patterns. It's a reality many people face when grief doesn't have an outlet, when there's no space to speak, cry it, or share it. And yet, even in his darkest moments, something within him began to stir. The part of him that still heard his father's laughter, still remembered the quiet strength behind Robin's smile. Zach didn't want his father's story to end with sorrow. He wanted it to live on, not as a tragedy, but as a call to action. So he began to heal, slowly, deliberately. He sought help, turned inward, and then outward, choosing connection over isolation. He started speaking publicly, not just about Robin, but about mental health, about trauma, and about the silent battles so many of us fight behind closed doors. In doing so, Zach found a purpose rooted in legacy. He co-founded organizations focused on mental health advocacy and emotional well-being, using his platform to uplift others who felt alone in their pain. He honored his father, not by hiding the truth, but by sharing it openly, vulnerably courageously. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant transforming pain into something that could help others. It meant using his own story to shine a light into the corners where stigma still hides. And it meant showing that grief doesn't have to be an ending. It can be a beginning of compassion, of community, of change. For Zach, Robin will always be more than a memory. He is a guiding voice, a presence in the quiet moments, and now a mission. Through Zach's journey, we see not only the cost of what was lost, but the power of what can be built in its honor. In the next part of this journey, we'll speak directly to those walking similar paths, the families, the caregivers, the quiet heroes. What can we do when someone we love is suffering in ways we don't fully understand? A message to those caring for loved ones. If you are caring for someone with Lewy Body Dementia or any form of progressive illness, this part is for you. It may not always feel like it, but what you're doing matters immensely, deeply, quietly. You are walking a path most people never see. And often you do it with little rest, little recognition, and even less certainty. You are the one who repeats the same answers to the same questions with love. The one who gently redirects confusion without making someone feel confused. The one who listens to stories that don't make sense, not because they're logical, but because they matter to the person telling them. And we want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for staying patient when your heart is tired. Thank you for loving someone who may not always remember your name, but who still feels your presence in ways deeper than memory. Caring for someone with Lewy Body Dementia is uniquely complex. The disease shifts from day to day, sometimes hour to hour. One moment, your loved one seems present, lucid, even joyful. The next, they may be frightened, lost, or unreachable. That emotional whiplash is exhausting. And the worst part, it often feels invisible to the world around you. But please know, you are not invisible. You are holding up the roof of someone's world, even as that world changes shape. That is no small thing. That is courage. That is grace in its purest form. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to feel angry, sad, or even resentful at times. Those feelings don't make you less loving. They make you human. What matters most is that you keep showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. If there's one thing we've learned from stories like Zach's, like Denise's, and so many others, it's that caregiving is not just a task. It's a relationship. It's not about fixing. It's about witnessing. Walking beside someone as they fade and loving them enough to stay. So here's a gentle reminder. Don't forget yourself. Seek support. Join a community. Share your story, because your mental and emotional health is just as important. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you shouldn't have to. In the final part of this journey, we'll reflect on what it means to say goodbye, to carry memory with meaning, and how hope still has a place even in the shadow of loss. If only there was more time, but there is still hope. If only we had more time. It's a thought that echoes in the hearts of so many who've lost someone to Lewy Body Dementia or any illness that steals pieces of a person before it takes their life. If only we had understood sooner. If only we had asked that one more question. If only we had one more afternoon, one more smile, one more moment of clarity. These if onlys are gentle ghosts. They follow us not to haunt, but to remind us how deeply we loved and how deeply we still love. Zach Williams has said that the final years of his father's life felt much longer than they actually were, because time, when filled with fear, confusion, and emotional pain, stretches. Every day is a marathon of trying to hold on. Every moment of clarity feels like a gift wrapped in fragility. But even in the face of loss, there is still something more powerful than absence memory. Robin Williams left behind a legacy of laughter, yes, but also of vulnerability, humanity, and a reminder that even those who bring light can struggle in darkness. His story is no longer just a tragedy. It's a teacher, a reason to talk, to question, to learn, and most importantly, to love better. Today, there are more conversations happening about Lewy body dementia than ever before. More families are sharing their stories. More doctors are being trained to recognize the signs. More caregivers are being supported. And that too is part of Robin's legacy. So if you're listening right now and you're grieving, if you're afraid because someone you love is slipping away, if you're unsure of what the future holds, please hold on to this truth. You are not alone. There is a community. There are resources. There are people like Zach, like Denise, like countless others who understand what you're going through. There is hope, not always the kind that fixes, but the kind that connects, that lifts, that softens even the sharpest edges of grief. Maybe we can't have more time, but we can have more awareness, more compassion, more care, and maybe, just maybe, that's how we make the time we do have more meaningful. So let's keep telling these stories. Let's keep listening, supporting, and standing together. Because even in the darkest moments, there's light in memory, in healing, and in love that never fades. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts, your stories, or even just a moment you remember. Someone out there might need it more than you know.